trying out for the Olympics, and she's going to do it. And the record stood for 19 years, and they put an eighth of an ounce on one side, an eighth of an ounce on the other.
11 million people watched her lose a tennis match. A 3-set match on a Monday afternoon against a woman who had already reached 2 Grand Slam finals, and 11 million people in one country stayed up, some past midnight, just to watch it happen live. That number will make sense in a minute. First, though, picture what happened 3 days later, in a city 4,000 miles from where she grew up, when the President of the United States said her name out loud in front of a crowd that had come to see him. It's 6 in the morning at a training complex outside Barcelona. The air still smells like overnight rain on clay. Nobody else is on the court yet, just her, a bucket of balls, and a coach in his 60s who has spent his life turning talented kids into terrifying ones. She's 20 years old, and she still wears the same style of ruffled socks she wore as a child back in the Philippines. The ones she once described as part of the uniform of a kid who hit balls against a wall with her brother every afternoon, then walked home holding her grandfather's hand. No entourage, no cameras, just the same routine she's run 1,000 mornings before this one. That kid is 3 days away from standing on a stage next to the most powerful man in the world. Washington in July isn't built for tennis. It's built for motorcades and press briefings, for people in suits deciding things that outlast every one of them. The tournament courts sit a few miles from the White House, and on an ordinary week, almost nobody outside the sport gives them a second thought. This wasn't an ordinary week. By the time the first practice session started, the fences around the outer courts were already draped in the flag of the Philippines: blue, red, white. And a single sun hung there by families who'd driven in from Virginia and Maryland before sunrise. Some had brought lawn chairs for a practice session, not even a real match. Washington, D.C. is home to one of the largest Filipino-American communities in the country. And for years, that community had been waiting for a morning like this one, where their flag hung next to the American one, not behind it, not smaller than it, just next to it. Then the president walked out, welcomed her by name, and for about 90 seconds a mid-tier tennis tournament became one of the stories coming out of the Capitol that week. Reporters who normally cover trade policy found themselves filing copy about a 20-year-old's forehand. 12 months earlier, none of this was on the radar. She was ranked outside the top 140, grinding through qualifying draws most fans never watch, fighting to keep her ranking points alive from one week to the next. No wild cards, no favors, every point earned on the unglamorous lower tours, the part of the sport nobody puts on a highlight reel. Then came Miami, and a win over Iga Swiatek that barely registered outside hardcore tennis circles at the time. Then a final in Eastbourne on grass. Then 2 WTA 125 titles, including one in Birmingham weeks before Wimbledon. Then Berlin, where she beat Elena Rybakina, a former Wimbledon champion, in straight sets. On a surface built to punish exactly her style of game, one result stacked on the next, each louder than the last, until even the analysts who'd stayed cautious about her stopped hedging. By the time she walked onto Wimbledon's center court in June, ranked 30th in the world, she wasn't a surprise story anymore. She was a seed, the 29th, and the first Filipina in history to be seeded at a Grand Slam at all. Then she beat the defending champion. Iga Swiatek, 3-time Grand Slam winner and one of the most dominant players of her generation, lost to her in the 4th round, 7-6, 6-2, in a first set so tight it took 84 minutes and an 11-point tiebreak to settle. 24 winners to 21 unforced errors, a cleaner match than the champion across the net managed to play. She became the first player from the Philippines ever to reach the second week of a major. 4 days later, she lost. Jasmine Paolini, a former finalist at 2 different Grand Slams and a player with far more experience under this kind of pressure, beat her in 3 sets. 6-4, 4-6, 6-3. It wasn't a collapse. Her serve, the one part of her game that's always lagged behind the rest, betrayed her at the worst moments. She fought back from a set down, forced a decider, and still lost the last 2 service games when the match hung in the balance. on legs that had already played 3 hours of tennis in 31-degree heat. Some fans in the stands had already given up on the sun and left for shade by the second set. She stayed, found depth on her ground strokes when her serve wouldn't cooperate, and dragged the match somewhere it had no business going. Afterward, in the press room, she said she doesn't expect to play her best tennis every single day, that losing is simply part of the job she signed up for. It read less like disappointment and more like someone who already knew this wouldn't be the last time she sat in that chair. The loss, oddly, did more for her than the win did. It made her human. A victory over Swiatek could be filed away as a single upset. A 3-set battle against a former finalist with the crowd on its feet at the final point, regardless of the scoreline, could only be read one way: as a player who belongs there permanently, not by accident. Highlights of the Swiatek win pulled in over 1.2 million views on Wimbledon's own channel that week, more than matches involving Novak Djokovic and Serena Williams combined. The Paolini loss didn't kill that momentum. It gave the story a second act, and second acts are what turn a moment into something that lasts. That's part of why Washington mattered. She flew almost directly from London to the capital, barely catching her breath, into a draw stacked with defending champion Leylah Fernandez, former U.S. Open champion Naomi Osaka, Marta Kostyuk, and Venus Williams, one of the deepest fields the tournament had seen all season, and she was walking into it running on fumes. Grass doesn't hand its lessons over to hardcourt for free. The low, skidding ball that rewards her instincts on grass sits up higher and slower on hardcourt, giving bigger hitters more time to tee off. Whatever she'd built in London still had to prove it wasn't borrowed from the surface. Some analysts had quietly called her overhyped after Miami, a hot streak amplified by a passionate fan base more than a genuinely elite game. On paper, they had a point. Her movement isn't the fastest on tour. Her serve still trails the rest of her game, and the raw numbers alone don't scream generational talent. But the more closely people studied the tape, her anticipation, her return game, the way she raises her level against the biggest names rather than shrinking from them, the more that argument lost ground. The consensus shifted fast, from overhyped to underestimated, and Washington was set to be the next data point on a surface that owes her nothing. Underneath the scorelines, this story was never really about tennis. It's about what happens when someone with no blueprint, no player before her to point to and say that's proof it's possible, builds the blueprint herself, in real time, in front of a country of more than 100 million people who'd never had a tennis star to call their own. Families in Melbourne, Toronto, and London pulled out Filipino flags for a match at 6 a.m. their time. 8,000 people packed an arena in Manila to watch her play on a screen, cheering a match she wasn't even present for. She wore a shirt designed by a Manila-based designer, stitched with the country's national flower. Long before any of this attention arrived. For Wimbledon, she had a Filipino phrase embroidered onto the back of her visor, one that roughly translates to something taking root and refusing to stop growing. It wasn't a marketing decision. It was a private mission statement the world happened to be watching by the time she needed it most. There's a memory she's talked about from her graduation at the Nadal Academy. Every year the Academy brought in a surprise guest speaker, and she used to love guessing who it would be. One year Roger Federer, another year Paula Badosa. The year it was Iga Swiatek, fresh off a Grand Slam win. She remembers being especially thrilled. There's something almost poetic about that now. The player she was once excited to hear speak became the player she beat on center court years later. Somewhere at that same academy right now, there's a kid on a court at 6 a.m., hoping this year's surprise speaker is her. 3 things sit ahead. First, Montreal and Cincinnati, the 2 hard-court tournaments between Washington and the U.S. Open. The stretch that will show whether her grass court game can survive on a different surface, against players who've had all summer to study how she beats people. Second, the U.S. Open itself in New York at the end of August, where a genuinely deep run would put her inside the world's top 20-something no Filipino player, man or woman, has ever achieved. Third, and quieter, Tony Nadal, the coach who spent decades shaping Rafael Nadal's mind as much as his forehand, is reportedly still working with her, and some reports suggest Rafael Nadal has begun offering informal input through the academy this season. Those reports haven't been independently confirmed, But the interest itself says something. The people behind one of the sport's greatest champions are paying attention to a 20-year-old from Manila. A business story is unfolding alongside the sporting one. A Nike deal is already in place, and a clothing line is reportedly in development. Television numbers in the Philippines have reached levels unheard of for a tennis player this early in a career, and sponsors are watching that audience curve as closely as they watch her ranking. Because the sport doesn't just reward players who win, it rewards players who bring new audiences through the door with them. Both numbers are still climbing, and neither shows signs of slowing down before the US Open. 18 months ago, the question in every press room was whether she could compete with the best in the world. Now the question has changed. Nobody asks if she belongs. They argue about how high the ceiling goes, and every time someone sets a number on it. She seems to arrive a few months ahead of schedule. 11 million people watched her lose a tennis match in July. By the time she plays her next Grand Slam, that number probably won't be a headline anymore. It'll just be an ordinary Tuesday. A kid from Manila with ruffled socks, on a court 6,000 miles from home, drew a president into saying her name out loud on national television, not because anyone told him to, but because by the time she walked into that room, it would have been strange not to. Go back to that 6 a.m. court outside Barcelona. Nobody was watching then. No flags, no cameras, no president waiting at a microphone, just a kid, a bucket of balls, and a coach who believed something the rest of the world hadn't caught up to yet. Every person who stood at that fence in Washington before sunrise, flag in hand, is proof of how far that quiet, unwatched morning eventually traveled. If you've followed her since Miami, you already know how rare this is. If you're hearing her name for the first time right now, remember this moment, because in a few years, most people will know it.